Now let us turn to 1 Samuel chapter 28. 1 Samuel chapter 28. Last week we considered, the more we are desperate for something, the more trouble, I would say the more sins we will fall into. The more we want something, the more we will listen to the voice of our flesh, like King Saul. All right? Look at verse 18. Because thou obeyest not the voice of the Lord, then whose voice was he obeying? His flesh. The more we want something desperately, the more we will develop envies and jealousies. The more we would, waste our time on earth, just obsessed with something or someone, doing things or pursuing things that truly have wasted our life on earth. The more we want something, the more bad decisions we will make. The more we desperately want something, the more useless we become to God, because we only want to get our ways. Today we will consider, if knowing that the more desperately I want something, the more sins I will commit, then are there things that I should desperately want? Yes. We want to consider today, what should I be desperate for? There are things that if we are desperately wanting, deeply desiring, aiming for, implementing in our lives, when there are certain things that we desperately would go to extremes, would deny ourselves, to put in place in our lives, we will do very well. The opposite of King Saul's life. We will not fall like King Saul. There are things that we can learn from the summary of King Saul's life, David's life thus far, and the other characters thus far. There are things that we can glean from their life and compare it with King Saul's life and know if we wanted desperately the right things, we will not fall. So what are they? What are they? Now, look at verse 17 first, all right? Verse 18. Because thou obeyest not the voice of the Lord, nor executest his fierce wrath upon Amalek. You see, God will bring to a clear remembrance to King Saul. It is this particular situation, this event, that you did not execute the fierce wrath upon Amalek, that now you are in this state. And God is going to remove you at this point. So we must always go back to this situation, all right, to learn from it. Now turn to chapter 15, please. Chapter 15. What do we desperately want that will keep us safe? Now look at verse 8 of chapter 15. And he, which is King Saul, took Agag, the king of the Amalekites, alive, and utterly destroyed all the people with the edge of the sword. But, verse 9, but Saul, see, God does not want to call him King Saul here. He's been calling him Saul. He was not behaving like a king of Israel. But Saul and the people spared Agag and the best of the sheep. Now, and then Samuel approached him. All right, Samuel approached him. And we know the rest of the story. He kept giving excuses. We did everything that you said we should do. Then why do I hear the sounds of animals? Right? Why? Then he started with excuses. And he did not kill King Agag. All right? Now ask yourself this. King Saul, if he wanted something desperately, he would not have reached this stage. What would that be? What would that be? Now, if he was someone who desperately wanted to be very honest about his choices, about his decisions, he would not reach this stage. Because even before he gave excuses to Samuel, He has already decided in his mind, right, that he was not going to kill Agag. He has already decided in his mind that he will keep the very best. By the time he gave these excuses and rationalized and blamed others, he has already made that decision in his heart to spare. He has made that decision not to hear the voice of the Lord. He has made that decision to listen to his own voice. Now, if King Saul was brutally honest, and that is what we must desire desperately, to be a person who's always desperate, to be brutally honest with every thought in our mind, with every choice that we are about to make. Honest to say, why am I doing this? You see, he just pushed it aside, don't think about this. But unfortunately, Samuel had to ask him. Then when Samuel asked him, then he has to come up with some excuses. But the problem happened before all this all this blaming and excuses. Now remember, King Saul was someone, from the beginning, right? He was someone who looked for lost animals. The father sends him to look for lost animals. So to him, before he killed the animals, and the very best, maybe in his mind, wow, these are far better than what my father used to send me out to look for. You see, all these things were already occurring in his mind. Don't kill them, keep them. Of course, the excuse will be, for your God, right? Now, if only King Saul desperately wanted to be honest at that point, he would just simply face the reason. Now, why am I not killing all these animals? Instead of pushing it aside in his mind, why am I not killing King Agag? Why? Before he displayed them, took him around to display him, to show off to other cities, he made that decision not to kill him. Because he wanted to do that. Now, if he was brutally honest, I am already beginning to imagine how I will look when I parade King Agag, this powerful king of the Philistines, Amalekites, move him around. Wow, imagine how. Now, if he were brutally honest, at that point, he had the chance. I say again, he had the chance. He would have at least had the chance not to make that decision. Now, Christians, when we are not brutally honest at every moment of every day about what we are thinking about, why we want to do certain things, why we make certain trade-offs, why we make certain choices, that one decision that we do not want to be brutally honest is going to start the wheels of motion of many things that are going to follow thereafter. Do you understand why it is so important that we are desperately always wanting to ensure we are very honest because of that one action of his? Don't think about this, just don't kill King Agag. That one action of his that he refused to honestly face in his intentions will lead to a series of subsequent events. All because at the beginning he did not face himself and say, why am I doing this? Why am I talking to King Agag still? Why am I still talking to this person? Why am I still looking at this person? Why is this person still around when God says, get rid of this person? You know, from there, when we are not brutally honest, we don't take the opportunity to be brutally honest, which would have given us a chance to stop motions of other activities, events moving on. Now, then the rest of the problem starts, right? Because now, with all those events happening, King Agag is alive, you know. He's alive. If he was killed, the next step of wanting to parade him could not happen because King Agag is dead. There's no use dragging a dead body around, right? People are not impressed by that. The kings of the other nations, they drag the king alive. But if he honestly examined that, he had a chance to just kill him. He had the chance to think, God, what am I doing? I am blatantly disobeying you. You see, it's only when you're honest, then you say, God, I am blatantly doing this. What am I doing? You are omniscient. You are omnipresent. What am I doing, God? Then he will have killed, at least he will have the opportunity to stop and kill him. Then the next step of parading him pride cannot happen. Cannot happen. But because he did not kill him, now temptations arises. Still alive. I don't want to do it. I want to do it. Don't want to do it. But he's still alive. Just do it. Right? You will, as we have learned, you will keep your dream alive. You can continue to the next step, and the next step, and the next step. And when you're in the next step, you make more bad decisions, right? You see how, when you are not desperately desiring, always wanting to be very honest about why you say something to someone, do something. Now, please, it's just not about just doing. What you say to your husband, to your wife, to other Christians, to the pastor, to your parents. What you say before it comes out of your mouth. Why am I saying this way? Why am I doing this way? Because if you don't take the opportunity to confront yourself before God, the opportunity to stop is gone. Then we will begin to excuse ourselves with more excuses. Then you begin to taste that next temptation. Then you begin to see your dreams coming true. Then you begin to see you're reaching closer to what you want. And then you begin to, well, maybe nothing will come out of it, but I get to be doing what I want to do with who I want to do it. Right, young people? It just keeps going on and on. Now I hope that you begin to understand that being honest precedes doing what is right. I say again, at least we would have stood the chance. At least we have stood the chance of not letting the wheels of motion be set. Now, if he was desperately honest from the beginning, he had a chance to kill King Agag, things would not have snowballed to this stage. Because God said, it is this event that caused me to remove you, to tear the kingdom from you. Foolish, isn't it? Now, because of that, King Agag is alive. He went around building a memorial for himself. All the horrible things that he began to do, right? Now then, the next thing is this. Now, does it mean that I'm doomed to failure? Because some of us may feel, yes, it is true. If I was someone who's always desperate to be honest, I would not have said that. I would not have done that. I would not have made that choice. And that choice has been made, and now the next things and the next thing and the next thing, more and more events begin to occur. Am I doomed? I know I should have been desperately honest before I turned on the computer, before I went out with my friends, before I bought this thing, before I did that, before I made this trade-off, before I made that choice, before I made that promise. I should have been desperately honest, and I could have stopped, but I did not, and now I am stuck. Or now, because of that, this addiction has grown in my life, this computer game, or whatever, social media, whatever it is. Are you doomed? Say, yes, I should have stopped. Are you doomed? Well, as long as you continue to learn this lesson, then start now. Be desperately honest about why you are going to take the next step. Because as long as you do that, yes, these things have happened. Here, you still can stop things, stop the next series of events. King Saul had many opportunities to do that. God was extremely, as we have seen, kind and gracious. As long as you keep maintaining this attitude, why am I turning on the computer again? Be honest. Why am I maybe I'll just take a look at this game or at this website, whatever it is. Be honest. Where does this always lead me to? What does this always result in? Be honest. Desperately honest. I am just going back to the vomit again. Be honest before God. Omnipresence is a very powerful lesson to learn about God. Omniscient as well. Lord Jesus, look at me. Be honest. Have that conversation. King Saul would not have that conversation with God. He would not say, Jehovah, look at me. Can you imagine I'm thinking about sparing King Saul? What am I thinking? Have that conversation honestly with God, with your soul. Now that is what it means. Kneel before God. Before you do that, just kneel before God. God, you know what is in my heart. You are omniscient. I have many good reasons. Keeping the best for you, right? Making this choice for my family is good for my family spiritually, right? It's good for this and good for that. But God, you know, only you know why I am making this decision. We can cloud many things like King Saul when we are dishonest. Keeping the very best to offer for God. Why is it bad? Why is it evil? Wow, what a thoughtful king you are. You see, no one will see, no one will know. That is why you must be desperately honest. You are not doomed. Start like that now. If you are now in the throes of some activities that you know is now wasting your time, you know is pulling you down, you know you're obsessed with it. Now please remember this. When you do not want to be desperately honest at the onset, and you let the things begin to escalate, you will become a thorn in your flesh. If you do not want to be desperately honest from the beginning and then arrest that and take the opportunity to stop the thing, it will become a thorn in your flesh, a thorn in your eyes. God told them many times, if you spare these enemies, they will become a thorn in your side. They will become a thorn in your eyes. Means they will keep coming back to disturb you, tempt you, trouble you, torment you. You only needed to have done that in the beginning. But when they spared, if only they asked themselves, what am I doing? Be honest. No one will know. They think that we are doing a good thing, right? Sparing them. Well, we can spare these resources, God. They can be servants for you. They did that mistake many times. But deep in their heart, they wanted to be masters. That is all. They experienced the Egyptians as their masters. So when God said, kill all these people, they wanted to experience being like an Egyptian master. If we spare some, they become our servant. But they say, no, God, they will be your servant, useful for you. You see, we can have many reasons. And then they became constantly, even now. The reason why the Philistines are there, the Amalekites are there, constantly disturbing them, tormenting them, was because they did not honestly say, why did we spare these people? Now, Christians, you know, if you're honest, the thing that you let in your life, just a little thing, all right? But you know it's because of your love for money. You know it's because of your love for recognition, your desire to impress others, to be thought well of others, for certain position, for certain lifestyle, to have something that others have that you don't have. You know what is in your heart. And then now you know those things are now an obsession of yours. It begins to trouble you. You get fed up of it. You want to get rid of it, but you cannot. You have already become addicted to it. You get so frustrated at yourself. You see, when you do not want to be desperately honest from the beginning, this is what will happen. God promises that. Do not listen to the false promises of sin. So, we will become frequently, if not constantly, obsessed with the thing. You want to push it out of your mind, you cannot. You want to overcome it, you're stuck. But Christian, God promises this, I can do all things. I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. But you know what? You will have to work very much harder. You have to be more obsessed with being honest. We bring it upon ourselves now. Now you are in the middle of this sequence of events that started, or this addiction that have started in you. Now you have put thorns in your life. You are able to overcome it. Please know that. There is not a single sin in the Christian's life that you ever feel, I cannot overcome this. This thing that I'm obsessed with, this thing that's constantly on my mind, or this person, or this job or this whatever. I cannot. There is no such thing. But you have to acknowledge those are the consequences that you have let into your life. Those are the thorns you have let into your life. Now, as God has said, but you can overcome them. But do not even reach that stage, right? If you're desperately honest always, why am I doing this? Why am I going to this place? Why am I buying this? Why am I making this choice? Right from the beginning, you do not have to go through all that. Now, remember one of our messages is curiosity killed the cat. Just curious. Now it becomes an addiction. Then you waste time. You waste God's resources. You make more wrong decisions. You're stuck. You're addicted. Right? So that's the first thing we see in King Saul's life. If only he was obsessed, always, with, let me be very, very, very sincere. Why am I doing this? Why am I doing that? You will stand the chance to stop it. But if you're in it, start being honest. So that's the first thing that I hope we, as a Christian in our life, always be very desperate for. Now, somehow the theme always comes back to this. You see, the dishonesty of King Saul. Then we had the Holiday Bible program last year. The constant repeated theme is God has been giving to us, be honest. You know, those who say things to impress others or say things to get away with things, say things so that they get their way. Now, don't keep doing that. You can fool your husband. You can fool your wife. You can fool your parents. But don't keep doing it. You stop. Be desperately honest. Stop. Because it will become your mode of operation over time. Your heart, your conscience will be desensitized. Oh, you know, husband, I'm very busy. But what do you do during the day? You know. Oh, wife, I'm very busy at work as well. But what are you doing when you get home? What are you doing in your room? Dad, Mom, I'm very busy. What are you doing in your room, young ones? You will become King Saul. Always avoiding thinking about, why did I say this? Because, when I say this, I can deceive my husband, my parents, my Christian friends. Then I can keep doing it. Then after some time, you do not even want to get rid of it because it's now a part of your mode of operation, a part of how you spend your time. But your husband will think you're very busy. Your wife will think you're very busy. Your parents will think you're very busy. Your child will think that you're trying very hard. Remember, you will make more and more worse decisions. Do not be such a person. It's foolish. Do you want to wait till God says, because of this, it's the end? That's it. Don't wait till then. So that's the first one. And I want to turn you, please, to Proverbs chapter 5. Proverbs chapter 5. Proverbs chapter 5. Now look at verse 21. Proverbs 5:21. For the ways of a man are before the eyes of the Lord, and he pondereth all his goings. Let this be something that you memorize, you engrave in your heart, and you hide it in your heart. I can fool men. I can fool the closest. But God says, the ways, your ways, are before his eyes. His all-seeing eyes everywhere. He pondereth all his goings. You can push it out of your mind. Just don't think. Just say it. All right? Just don't think. Just do it. Just don't think. Just make this decision. Just make this choice. You can push it out. But God says, I ponder all your goings. Why wait till God ponder our goings? Why not be desperately honest with ourselves all the time? Desperately, always be a person that's like that. Why wait till God says, I am pondering your ways? I know what you're thinking about. I know why you're doing this. Proverbs 16, let's turn to Proverbs 16. Be desperately honest, because God says, I know. What's the point of pretending? and then getting into trouble. Proverbs 16 verse 2, let me read. Proverbs 16 verse 2. Now it says, all the ways of a man are clean in his own eyes, but the Lord weigheth the spirits. You see, we can have many reasons like King Saul. We can rationalize. We are very good. In fact, you want to add one more to last week's message? An E. The more desperately we want something, the more excuses we can find. All the ways of a man are clean in his own eyes. No, I need to do this. No, I need to do that. No, we need to have this. No, I need to. But God says He weighs the spirit. Other people may truly be convinced. Yes, it's better for me spiritually. Yes, it's better for the family spiritually. Yes, I'm very, very, very busy and all that. But God says, I weigh your spirits. I'm very busy. I need to go and do this and do that. But why are you there? Why are you really there? Why are you really doing that? You know, I need to go to the gym. Because this and that. Really? Why? Why? You may even relate it to spiritual things. But why? God says He weighs our spirit, our intentions, our honest reasons, our spirit, our intentions. So Christians, if you would be a person who is always desperately wanting to be honest with every thought, every decision, every choice, every word, you will have that chance always to stop before a series of actions will follow. Now the next thing that we want to be desperately wanting. Saul would not, all right, I come back to the Amalek situation because God says it's the Amalek situation, so let's go to the Amalek situation to avoid the fall of King Saul. Now remember, God says you must harem everything. Remember the word harem? The Hebrew word, all right? It means everything is devoted to God. So you must kill everything. Because anything that is alive, you are going to use it for yourself. So everything must be killed. The meaning is devoted to God. Now this particular case was a harem case. Harem has to do with the glory of God. The glory of God is saying, I own everything. Yes, sometimes you go to battle, I don't tell you to destroy everything. You can use some of them. But please know, it's because I allowed you to have my things. That He is the absolute owner, absolute supreme one to be listened to. It's God's way of showing, please know, I am God. You listen to me and everything belongs to me. The glory of God. And all the nations would see that God can destroy the entire so-called race, all right, the people. Only God can do that. And only God has the right to do that. All right? Please don't call God someone who committed genocide. God is the owner of all life. That is the meaning. When God says, go harem, go perform harem. But, so in other words, but this, King Saul, when he did not perform this, and look at chapter 28. Chapter 28. God made a specific mention, chapter 28, verse 18. Nor executest his fierce wrath. That is the harem. The fierce wrath means nothing must be standing and alive. Nothing. His fierce wrath. It has to do with harem. Saul did not care. Saul did not care for the glory of God. Now, the more he brought the king to parade was his own glory. Please know that. God's intention is Agag must die to show that God gave the command and Agag is dead. But now God gave the command and Agag is alive. It was the glory of God that Saul was defying. Please know that. When God tells us to do something and to do something thoroughly, and we don't. We are basically saying, God, I do not need to listen to you, and I can get to keep this and do this in my life in disobedience to your command. You are challenging the glory of God. But then we keep saying, my chief end is to glorify God. I want to glorify God. Please pray for me this week at work. I will glorify God in school. But then whenever we defy God's command, we are basically saying, God, I do not need to obey you in this. Saul had a desperate desire to exalt his own glory. That is why when he made the decision, when he was not honest, if he were honest, and he had a habit of being honest about every choice, every decision, he would say, actually, the reason why I'm not killing Amalek and I'm still talking to Agag now, I'm still talking to him, is because I have a pride problem. I want to be exalted. I imagine of how the people will applaud me, how the people will praise me in church, how the people, even they don't praise me, in their hearts they were thinking, wow, this person is so clever, so good, and contributed so much. At that point, he should have just said, oh, actually this is because of pride, and I'm challenging the glory of God. I need to be desperate to exalt God. That is the second lesson we learn. The desperation. A life that is always desperately wanting to exalt God. Christians, know this. Your obedience is not something negative. It's not something bad. Your obedience is always a reflection that, Lord, I want to exalt you. Obedience is a glory. Your obedience is a glory to God. Child, when you disobey your parents, you shame your parents. You know that. Obedience is your way of showing glory, reflecting that God is glorious. Even if I do not like it, even if I do not agree with it, even the world mocks me. But He is the most important. Glory to God. Now, Christians, be someone who's desperately wanting to exalt God's name. You say, Pastor, we know that. We memorize that, right? The chief end of man is to glorify God. We say that all the time. We pray that every Tuesday night. But let us go down to the details, right? The details. Now, to want to exalt the glory of God, then you must be desperately wanting to always do the will of God. Always wanting the will of God to be fulfilled. So it's easy to say, I want to glorify God. Pray that I will glorify God in my decisions, in my choices, in what I do today, what I plan to do tomorrow. Then you have to ask yourself, am I desperate to do God's will in this matter? His known will, His preceptive will. The personal will, seeking God's personal will. Am I desperate to do God's will? You say, how is it related? Now, King Saul desperately wanted to do his own will. That is what it is. He wanted the throne for himself. Now, look at verse 17. The Lord hath done to him as he spake by me. See, it was as he spake. It is a reminder. I have told you about God's will before, Saul. Why do you call me back? I'm just going to say the same thing to you. You knew God's will. God has done to him. God has done to David. I told you before. That is God's will. For the Lord hath rent the kingdom out of thine hand and given it to thy neighbor, even to David. I've told you this before. That is God's will. But guess what? Why was he someone who would not be desperate for the glory of God? Because he's not someone who's interested in the will of God. The will of God always glorifies God. That is why God has a will. All things are always to glorify Himself. You knew God's will, King Saul. And look at how he describes it in verse 17. The Lord hath rent the kingdom out of thine hand. Now, earlier on, when Samuel said this in 15:28, let me read to you 15:28. Samuel said, the Lord hath rent the kingdom of Israel from thee. From thee. He said from thee, but this time he said from thine hand. It's almost like this guy is clinging on to his own will, clinging on to the throne so hard that this time Samuel will say, it's not rent from you, rent from your hand. the thing that you cling on to and refuse to let go of, to do God's will. God intended for David, you should have started transitioning. Instead, you clung on to your will. Christians, don't talk big about wanting to glorify God. When the rubber hits the road, it's about to what extent will you do God's will? That is the test. Now, to what extent? To what extent? To what point? That you would desire God's will to be done. Let's start with our own life, all right? When it is within your reach, but when you know it is not God's will, you let go of it. King Saul was in that position already. Yes, God put it in his life. God put it in his hand. But when God says, because of this, what you did, it is given to David. But he still had it in his hand. He refused to step down. He refused to starting to do transitioning. Instead, he intended to kill David so that he can keep his will alive, keep his own will alive. When it is in your hands, will you give it up? How desperately do you want God's will to be done? Even when it is in my hand. I have this job now. I have this situation that's very, very good for me now. But now you realize it is against God's word. I want to exalt God means I want His will to be done. That is when He's glorified the most in my life. Look at King David. Look at David. It was totally within his reach, twice at least, to kill King Saul and become king. And David was told that he will become king. He can rationalize in himself, but he was brutally honest. As long as Saul is there, he is the Lord's anointed. I should not pretend otherwise. God has not removed him, then God intended him to be still there. But it was within his reach, but he was brutally honest at that point. He did not start a chain of actions that would have really destroyed himself. He would not touch him. He would tell King Saul, don't do this. Don't do this. It's not God's way. David was within David's reach, not once but twice. But he says God's will must be done. It's not God's timing, then it's not God's timing. Now that is the test. How desperately do you want God's will to be done when it is in your hand, when it is within your reach, but you stay away from it, when you know it is not God's will. Now, when you have not reached such a stage in your life, you stand on dangerous grounds. In fact, even the very thing that God would want you to have, whatever it is, God will still withhold it from you because you're not ready. You're not ready. David passed the test twice. That is why he's called a man after God's own heart. He only wanted the will of God to be done. The will of God is God's heart, what He desires. Even if it means it is within His reach to get what He wants, no, I will not do it. I will not make this decision. That is why he was ready. As long as you would not let go of your will, that thing, even if it's something that God wants you to have, is still your idol. Moses was a very good example. You know the story. Moses wanted to deliver God's people. What's so evil about that? To lead God's people out of the promised land, especially when it's prophesied in the Word of God, especially by the events in his life, it's clearly him. No one will deny that. No one will deny that. But it was an idol in his heart. And God had to bring him to the point where his motivations, his pride was no longer there. Then he was ready. So be desperate, I hope. Please be very desperate for God's will to be done. That is your desperation to exalt Him. All right? That's the second thing. So really ask yourself, why do you want a permanent residency? Now, I've known people who want permanent residency so badly. They make choices. without being honest. They make choices that on the outward is not sinful. But they were not honest why they made that choice, because that choice will lead them to a PR. I've never seen good things coming out of such things. Person's life is destroyed by that choice. Has PR? Yes. But life in a mess. In a mess. Because you would not be honest from the beginning. Why am I doing this? Is it really just to get a PR? Or is it really God's will for my life? Would not ask that question. But would tell people, yes, it is. Yes, it is. But everyone can see it is not. So Christians, do not be so foolish. Be desperately honest and be desperately wanting God's will to be done in your life. Why do you want? Why do you want a certain job? Jobs are not sinful if the job nature itself is not sinful. Why do you want to do certain things in church? Why do you want something, someone? Why? You can say it's for God. But Lord, be very honest and say, really, God, is this really your will? You know my heart. Ask Him to show your heart. All right, so we covered two things. Desperately wanting to exalt God. Well, the second, proven by desperately wanting God's will to be done in your life. But the third one is desperately wanting God's will, not just for your life, but to be done in other people's life. King Saul would not, look at verse 17. Look at verse 17. God has spoken by me. God has done this to him, given it to thy neighbor David. But he would not let God's will be done in David's life. Now, Christian, if only he desperately wants God's will to be done, not only in his life, but also in other people's life. They say, oh, you mean the first time when he heard it's for David? Then he will immediately begin transitioning. But that was not what he desperately wanted, that God's will be done in other people's life, although it's made known and made clear. Saul only cared for his own will to be done. Now, if you desperately want God's plans and purpose to be fulfilled, in other words, His glory, you will desperately want God's choice of persons for whatever He intends. You only want that because only God's choice, God's will be done in that person's life. Then His plans, His purposes will be fulfilled the best. So it goes back to, do you really mean it when you say, I want to exalt God? Now let us learn from Jonathan first. Jonathan. Now turn to chapter 23, verse 17. Jonathan is someone who wants very much God's will to be done in other people's life. Chapter 23, verse 17. You see, these are very difficult lessons. Look at verse 23, verse 17. Now, verse 16. And Jonathan, Saul's son. You see, emphasis. Please know how the son is so different from the father. Jonathan, and this is Saul's son. And went to David into the wood and strengthened his hand. How? In God. Verse 17. And he said unto him, Fear not, for the hand of Saul my father shall not find thee, and thou shalt be king over Israel. My father will not find you because I will protect you. He wanted God's will to be done in David's life. He will not find you. Whatever I can do, I will do to protect you. And you will be king over Israel. That was God's will. He knew. And I shall be next unto thee, and that also Saul my father knoweth. And I will be next to you. I don't care what my father thinks. I want only God's will to be done in your life. And even if this is detrimental to me, I will stand next to you. I will support you. What is the test? You say, I want God's will to be done in someone's life. Will you stand with the person and support the person? Jonathan was such a man, desperately wanting only God's will to be done in other people's life, even in his own life. So what if I'm king's son and I don't stand a chance anymore? It doesn't matter. We learned that lesson. Are we going to apply it? Desperately, always like that. If only King Saul, look at what God says it, and Jonathan, Saul's son. If only Saul was like his son in his desperation to ensure that God's will is done, oh, he would have been a great help to David. He would not have wasted his entire life. Remember, one of the problems, the more you want something desperately, the more bad decisions you make, and as a result, the more time you will waste on earth. He would not have wasted his entire life. He would have, if he wanted that to be done in David's life, he would have started transition and planning. He would have done like Saul, stand next to David. God would have used him as a help to David. He could have still done many things for God and meet God well. Now, if only King Saul desperately wanted God's will to be done in David's life, like his son, he would be very different. Now, fourthly, let's be more specific about wanting God's will to be done in someone else's life. All right? Let's split hairs. Let's be more desperately honest about this. Because you can want very much something to be done in someone else's life, but you must be desperately honest from the beginning. Why do you want this? Not in your life, in your son's life, in your husband's life, in your wife's life, in your relative's life. Why do you want God's will to be done in their life? Because it can be ulterior motives still. There can still be ulterior motives. You see how important it is to be brutally honest? Desperately, always asking yourself, you want your child to serve, or you want your husband to serve in church. And it may be even God's will for your child or your husband to serve in the church. And you say, I want God's will to be done in their lives. But because of the relationship, it was actually because of your pride. My husband is in charge of this, My husband is doing that, My husband is in this and that, My husband. Or my son. Now, this is one of the problems. Seniors, be very careful. It's sometimes very painful to talk with elderly people in churches, not just ours. First time you're Reverend Joseph. My son is elder in this church. My daughter is the pianist. What does it matter? What does it matter? Perhaps truly it was meant for the son to be an elder in the church. You see, you can want God's will to be done in someone else's life, but it was due to ulterior motives. Stop. Ask yourself, why am I praying this? Every time you see your husband doing something, or you hear your husband being appointed for something, pride wells up in your heart. Stop. You deeply want God's will to be done for your child. Say, no, I know my child very well. God's will for my child is to get married. And maybe it is true. But why do you want your child to be married? So you're not embarrassed that they're not married. Why? Why do you want your child to get married? People keep asking, I want my child to get married. It has nothing to do with so that my child will find the right person, get married, and their marriage will be use of God to glorify Him, and they will live a correct life together and bring up godly seed for God's church in the next generation. All those things don't seem to be in your mind. It's another motive. Every time you think, I want my child to get married, ask yourself why. Yes, even if it is God's will. I desperately want to make things happen in the best way in another person's life, purely for God's name, God's kingdom, nothing to do with myself, my name, my agenda, my pride. Now, we must be desperately honest about these things. Now, how is this tested? How is this tested? Think of Jonathan. You see, At this point of this passage, you will see that I'm drawing in as many lessons we can learn in totality. I don't want to just gloss over all the past and say, oh, we learn and then we forget. We keep praying, Lord, help us to remember the lessons. Now think of Jonathan. The first time that Jonathan met David, and he saw how David brought the glory of God back to Israel. Jonathan was someone who clearly was desperate for the glory of God. And he saw that very clearly. God intends this man to be king of Israel. And this man is the one that will bring God's will to pass for Israel. The first time he met him, what did he do? Took out his armory, his princely sword. And at that time, sword was scarce, right? And gave it to David. First time. There is no relationship. There is no, oh, he's my good friend, or he's my son. Nothing. It shows his desperate, deep desire. He would do anything to ensure that God's will is done in someone else's life, even if this person has no relationship with me. All I care about very purely is the name of God be exalted, God's purposes be forwarded. Now, it tells a lot about him. Now then, there is also the lesson, right? Now, when you always want God's will to be done in someone else's life, you avoid that problem that we learned last week, the E, the envy and jealousies. You see, when you are only thinking, I want God's will to be done in this person's life, in this person's life, in this person's life, you come to church, I just want God's will to be done in my sister's life, my brother's life. There is no envy, no jealousy. Because all you care about is when God's will is done in their lives. Now, even if it's detrimental to me, all I know is this: God's will be forwarded the best way. Are you desperately always wanting God's will to be done in other people's life? You will avoid this whole problem of envy and jealousy. You will be happy. Now, the test is this. Jonathan was happy for David. That is the test. You will be genuinely glad for the person. You will do everything, unlike Saul, who stopped everything. You will do everything to make it possible. I will take out everything and give it to you, although it was already on me. My sword, my belt, my princely garment. No pride. No pride. Now, to be ready to do that, you must be ready to play second fiddle. You know what second fiddle? You're not the top person. You're in the shadow of someone else. All right? You're the number two at best. You need to be ready to play second fiddle. No pride. You want to be someone who's desperately wanting God's will to be done in other people's life. You must have no pride. It doesn't matter if it's not me. All that matters is God's will is this for this person. That's it. Saul was not willing to play second fiddle. If he was willing, desperately willing for God's will to be done in David's life, it was made to him twice clear. Ready to play second fiddle. Oh, he would have, I'm very sure, done well. Why do you think God repeatedly sent reminders, warnings, did not kill him immediately? Why? Giving him graciously chances and chances again. Christian, if you have been a proud person, if you have been a person who does a lot of things with agendas, it is God's grace and God's mercy. It's time to be desperately honest. It's time to be desperately wanting only God's will to be done in my life. If it's not for me, or it's for someone else's life, then let God's will be done in the other person's life. You must change before it becomes a mode of operation for you to behave like King Saul. Without even realizing it, you become like that. I will never accept second fiddle. And then you're going to waste a lot of time, right? Waste a lot of time, like King Saul, plotting, scheming. How do I plot and scheme so that I get the position? How do I plot and scheme so that I get the person? How do I plot and scheme? You spend your time wasted trying to get out of God's will, right? Now, if King Saul was only desperate to have God's will done in David's life, even if it means he played second fiddle. Now, do not look at any office in church or the world by its prominence, by its position. Be ready to do the meanest task for God. If that task is yours and it's the meanest task, all you care about is, this is God's will for me. Now, I'm very careful in this area in church. We are always very careful. It is not my will, not the board's will, not the session's will, not the people's will on who we put to do certain things. We always seek God's will first. Even when you pray for the session, who should be in session, it must always be submitted to God's will, not your ideas. Now, I'm very thankful for people who, and maybe I say it this way, I'm very clear with people. Now, if I ask you, the board asks you to serve in certain things, we make it clear always to you, whoever you are. We are not afraid of offending you. Please know, this is a test. If you do not turn out well, we will remove you. It's mutual. This is for you to assess God's will for your life. Also, if it is not, we won't force you. God's will is what matters. Please know that. I thank God for people who, after trying, they say, well, I've prayed, I've tried, it's clearly not God's will. All right? They acknowledge that. They won't feel, well, I must do this, I want to do this, or this is a lead role, I want to do this. When they test, no, it's not God's will. They step back because they want God's will to be done in their lives, and they know if it is not me, then it must be someone else. I'm not going to be in God's way. Then there's someone else who's supposed to do that. Let God's will be done in that person's life, whoever it is. Now that is how we must always be in our heart, desperately wanting God's will to be done in our lives. And if it means we have to forego something that someone else get God's will done in his life, then so be it. Now, especially in this area, right? Marriage. You know, sometimes I look at the ladies who are asked to be bridesmaid, or the men who are asked to be groomsmen. Now, I'm very thankful, at least thus far, that these bridesmaids, these groomsmen, they are genuinely happy for the person who is getting married. They do everything that they can to make the wedding as glorifying to God as possible. There's no jealousies, no envies. Why? Because there are people who simply want God's will to be done in their own life. If this is not the person for me, God, that I do not want. They simply want God's will to be done in another person's life. No envy or jealousy. Now, even if I thought maybe, this guy or this girl, I thought it might be God's will for me. But the person has chosen someone else, decided to get married to someone else. No envies, no jealousies. Why? Because they only want God's will to be done, even if it's in another person's life, even if it means it's something within my grasp, it's something that I can make happen by my will and by my scheming and plotting. No, they were genuinely happy. Well, at least from my perspective. But I see they're genuinely happy. They help. That is the test, my friend, for girls and guys. Like we went through in our recent series, right? You look at another girl, talking to the guy, you like the girl, envies and jealousies begin. You begin to, like King Saul, eye the person from the side of your eye, always watching. Why is she talking to him again? Or vice versa. If you want God's will to be done, you do not care about this. You do not plot and scheme. You do not try and get this and get that. You pray, you trust, and then you do what you need to do. You don't keep always finding opportunities to be near the person, to say or do something. You just sit wherever, do whatever, say whatever. Why? No personal agenda. Only God's will that matters, right? So it will come a test. Maybe you're thinking of a certain girl or a certain guy. This is an important test. I dwell a little bit on this because I think this is one of the biggest area of test for people who are single. Now, when you truly love God, you say, I want to love God more. You know what that means? David's heart. What's David's heart? only God's will to be done in my life, in someone else's life. Hence, we learn from David. He desperately always wanted that. When he wanted to build the temple for God, you know the story very well. God says, it's not for you, David, it's for your son. Any envy and jealousy? No, he spent his money, resources, buying things from far and wide, preparing the logistics, everything for King Saul, and for King Solomon to do the job. Why? He only cared. He only loved God. God, if this gets you what you want, it doesn't matter who does it. In fact, I will do everything to make this person successful, because when he is, you get what you want, God. Now, Christians, be desperately such a person. Be desperately such a person to avoid starting the set of motions that will begin to drown you. But instead, it will set forth a set of events, that will be so wonderful in your life, in living for God. If you truly love God, you will only want His will and His name to be done, right? His name to be exalted, sorry. Now, lastly, and we close. Fifthly, a short one. Now, be desperately wanting to be like our Savior. You say you want to be conformed to the image of Christ. You say you want to be Christ-like. What was Christ? Christ was given the most unenviable task, to God to become man. Christ was given a horrible task by God's, the Father's will, in the eyes of men, humanly speaking, to suffer, scorn, abuse, mockery, for those that He came to die for. But when He prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane, what did He pray? He prayed this, Father, if Thou be willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but Thine be done. That is Christ-likeness. No, can anything in our life be more difficult to accept honestly than this? When Christ was in the Garden of Gethsemane, did He try to push all these things aside and just figure out how to get out of this? No, He prayed honestly, if Thou be willing. But my will is totally submitted to yours. That is the meaning of being Christ-like. Desperately only wanting the Father's will to be done, whatever it may cost me, even if it means just to benefit someone else. That is us. Christians, until our lives reach a state, and this is what we want to desperately aim for all the time. All the time. Even if you're fallen, aim for this, start aiming for this. A state where your will does not matter anymore. I have no will of my own, Lord. I only want your will to be done. I only want your will to be done in someone else's life. Even if I want that, but because I have no desire, I have no problem. Reach a stage where truly you do not care about anything on earth. Then nothing, you live for nothing else on earth but the will of God be done. And when rubber hits the road, you know what it means. It means self-denial. It means something that your flesh may not like. But if you know it's a preceptive will, you know it's God's personal will, reach a stage of life where if you have no preference, where for yourself, no aims for yourself, but only God's will be done. Desperate for that. Now let us rise to sing the closing hymn. Shall we rise? 339. God calls us from all these things. Will we give ourselves to Him? 393. Shall we rise? 393.